just to start jumping right in here, couple of objectives for today. First and foremost, as I said at the outset, we really want to walk you through the framework that we use for assessing client websites. Hopefully, this gives you a framework or some focus for ways that you can do some of this work on your own website or on another organization's website. Oftentimes, auditing a website can be really overwhelming. There can be tens or hundreds or thousands of pages, and it can be kind of hard sometimes to understand where to get started. Thirdly is how can we bring data into this process a little bit, whether this is community input or analytics. I think it's really important to make sure that we're removing our own biases and making sure that we're focusing on, as Val talked about last time, focusing on the people that we are designing with, right? And shameless plug here, we are having an analytics workshop next month that actually is a really good follow-on to this and starts to talk about how to think about using analytics to assess the effectiveness of our site and also report, how effective our site is doing. And then lastly here, really is just about momentum. I feel like sometimes it can be really hard to get started. And so that's partly why we wanted this to be an interactive experience so that you all can actually practice doing some of this today. We'll have a couple of breakout sessions and then we'll do some group share outs as well. And then lastly, along the way, we have a bunch of free tools that we're going to share with you all. And at the end, an offer. So hopefully everybody's able to stick around for the full workshop. Before we get started and jump into the process, it would be great just to get a little bit of a sense of some of the questions or challenges that you all have run into with assessing your website's effectiveness. Is it tools? Are there certain things that have stopped you from doing it? Have you tried certain methodologies that have been challenging in the past? But would love to just hear from you in the chat. Are there specific questions or things you really want to make sure that we focus on during this process? Thousands of orphaned pages. Yes, that is a good one. That is definitely a big challenge. How do we, one, know where they are? How do we find them? Identifying stakeholders, that sounds like a really good question, especially sometimes we only think about web users, but oftentimes we need to consider internal stakeholders as well. We'll talk a little bit about that. How do we get them involved in the conversation? We're going to talk about that, especially in the final phase around reporting and trying to make this actionable. Explaining to leadership why a website should be organized for users and not organizational staff. Love that. No specific questions. Starting the process, we look at Google Analytics, haven't done any systematic audit. So hopefully this will be a good starting point for you, Jennifer, in terms of giving you maybe a little bit of a system, at least a starting point. Different pages have different goals. We'll definitely talk a lot about that. Keeping content to a minimum yet impactful. Yeah, definitely, Neil. We have a good resource for that hopefully will be a helpful thing. Segmenting audiences and target content. That's a good point. Making sure we explain complex concepts in an accessible way. That will definitely come up. That's great. So a lot of these things I'm happy to see. I think we're going to cover a lot of them. And obviously, as we go through this, if you feel like you have additional questions, keep them coming in the chat, and we'll have a big share out session kind of in the middle and at the end of this, and then hopefully we can get some questions or thoughts there too. So let's just jump right in and talk about the overarching process. This is a 5-step assessment framework that we use. And basically we break this into 3 different sections. Organize, so that's where we're going to start. It's always nice to get things organized before we actually run our audit. The second section is our audit. And then finally, how do we make all of this work actionable? How do we report it out to folks? How do we get them to understand what it is we were looking at in the first place? And do we need to find additional resources, whether it's time or bandwidth or budget? And then how do we prioritize the work that we want to do? So just jumping into this first organized section, throughout the course of today, we're actually going to be sort of following along with a case study. Many of you may be familiar with the ACLU as a national organization, but they actually have local branches in different regions as well. So the ACLU of Northern California is obviously working within that Northern California region, has been a partner of Rooted's for almost 10 years or longer, actually, at this point. And one of their strategic goals is to deliver civil rights information to a diverse group of individuals. And I bring that up because we're going to come back to it a few times during this session, just to kind of ground you in what we're trying to do on the website. For those of you that would like, this is actually an audit report that we did with the ACLU of Northern California. We're going to be following along in this audit report, and this is actually the same report that you all are going to generate today. You're going to be working on today. So it can be a good tool to kind of follow along as I talk through this stuff, but also a really good tool as you're doing your work. If you get stuck or something like that, it can be a good example that you can take with you. So the way we're going to structure today, as I said, we're going to work right now. I'm going to walk you through the first 3 steps to get your assessment or your audit organized. After we walk through those steps, we're going to do an activity where you all have a chance to run through and do those 3 steps for yourself or for your organization. We're going to come back and do a share out session together, and then we'll go through, I'll walk you through the last 2 steps. We'll do a breakout where you can, again, complete those last 2 steps on your own, and then we'll do a big group share out to wrap things up. Okay, so with that, let's just hop right into step number 1, where we are establishing the goals for this process, for this audit. The reason why we start here is because there are a lot of different ways to assess or audit websites. We can be talking about content strategy, we could be talking about technical performance, accessibility, brand voice. There are a million different things that we could potentially assess. And so we start here because we really want to narrow in on focus. We want to know what content are we looking at? Why are we looking at it? What are we hoping that content will do? And this is also really important because either if we're performing this audit as a team, it can be helpful to get everybody on the same page. But just as importantly, if we're going to report this out to a team, it's going to be really clear in terms of setting the context for what you're reporting. And yes, there will be a blank version of that audit worksheet, and I'm going to share that with you right before we get to do our breakouts. So the reason, as I said, there are 3 kind of reasons that we start here, and that helps set the context. The way that we get started with setting this context is I always like to formulate what's called a guiding question. And in this question, we really want to be as specific as possible about what we are looking at. So there's a couple of elements to a guiding question that I really think are important. Number 1, that this question is time bound. What is the period of time that we're going to be looking at, or for what period of time are we going to be assessing the website? Number 2, we want to be as specific as possible about the content or website functionality. Are we looking at a group of content? Are we looking at a specific page? Are we looking at a workflow where maybe there will be, 3 or 4 different pages? So we really want to be very specific about the content or the thing that we are looking at. Number 3, we want to make sure that our question is relevant to a strategic goal. And that's why I brought up the strategic goal earlier. We want to make sure that we are assessing or auditing towards a particular goal that we might have. Now, this might be an organizational goal, or it could be a specific department goal for a fund development group or a communications group. But it is important, I think, to make this question relevant to a specific strategic goal that you have. So getting back to our case study, our question example here is during the last year, referencing that time bound, did the Know Your Rights section of our website, specific content that we're going to be looking at, effectively deliver civil rights information to a diverse group of users? So again, ending there with our relevant strategic goal. Now, for those of you that are familiar with something like SMART goals, this is kind of like that concept where we're making the question as specific as possible so that we can measure. So for those of you following along at home with the audit that's filled in, you'll see in step 1, we've filled out our key question. And again, this is just a really good way to kind of ground ourselves in terms of the activity that you are going to be doing here shortly. Let's jump into step number 2. And we're going to start to talk about what content or individual page are we going to be looking at during our audit process? So if your guiding question already referred to a single page, so for instance, it said, over the last year, did our homepage effectively move people to XYZ location on our site? Then you've already identified the page that you're going to audit. But in our case, you'll remember that we said, does the Know Your Rights group of content do X, Y, and Z effectively? So in that case, we need to at least decide where we're going to start auditing that group of content. We need to identify a single page within that group that we want to start with. So how do we go about the process of selecting an individual page if we've talked about a group of content? Number one, and this goes back to the stakeholder thing, I always like to go to the people that are quote unquote owning this content within the organization, these internal stakeholders, right? Because they're going to understand the people that they work with best. What are they trying to communicate to them? What are the situations that they're in? And so oftentimes those content owners within your organization are going to understand which piece of content maybe is most valuable out of the content that they manage on the site. What's most valuable to their work, what's most valuable to their community. Secondly, you can consider analytics. Oftentimes, pages that get the most visitors, it's going to be a lot easier to audit those because large numbers give us really good information, right? So when we're looking at analytics later on, we can say, okay, this page had 10,000 page views. The numbers that we see, because they are very large, are representative of really what's going on. So you could use number of visits as a way to prioritize the content or the individual page that you want to audit. Thirdly, and most importantly, is was that page actually published or public for the entire time frame that your guiding question includes? So in our case, our guiding question said, excuse me, over the last year, did this content do X, Y, and Z? So we'd want to pick a piece of content that was available or published in the last year. And then lastly, I always like to just say, it's more important to get started than to get it right. If you're kind of stuck between maybe auditing a couple of different pages, just choose one, and it's possible in the future you'll end up auditing all of them. So this is a new process for you all. So it's all about doing it repetitively so you can build that muscle and get more comfortable with it. In our case, we ended up selecting a page that had very high traffic. It had a lot of programmatic impact. The content was really relevant to current events, and it had been published for quite a long time. And so we ended up selecting this Abortion Access in California page. And we did consult with the legal team at the ACLU of Northern California, and they said that this was actually a really important page for their work. So the final step in this organizational process, we know what our question is, we know what individual page we are going to audit, and now we're going to talk about what is it that we're actually trying to assess, which is a good question. So websites are created out of tens or hundreds or thousands of different pages of content. We heard from the community here that they often have a lot of different content that they're thinking about. But if you start to go out into the world and do a little bit of research about website content strategy, you may come across this idea that there are different categories of content. And so I like to think about 4 different categories of content. The first is informational. These are things like blog posts or maybe resources, and their goal is to deliver information maybe that answers a question, maybe it addresses a specific pain point or delivers technical knowledge, or maybe it delivers like timely information like a news event or a press release, things like that. But typically, this type of content may attract new users to your site. The second type of content is what we call investigational. These are things like your about page, your staff page, maybe your work page, annual reports. Typically, these are pages that help describe your organizational values, your mission, who you are. Maybe it has details about a specific program or the impact that you're specifically having. And oftentimes, this is where users come to kind of investigate who you are as an organization, what you do, what uniquely qualifies you for the work that you're doing. This can typically be a place for new types of individuals that are in your community, but Oftentimes you see other types of users go here as well. Thirdly, our navigation pages. These are like our homepage or our program landing page. We're helping people take the next step in their journey when they come to our website. So we don't typically want people to dwell on these pages for too long. We want to be able to really quickly deliver information to them so that they can navigate to the next step. And then lastly, our transactional pages. These are the pages like your donate page or your events page where you're trying to get somebody to RSVP, maybe an advocacy or a petition page. The idea of these pages is we want people to complete a specific task, right? In our case, the Know Your Rights content kind of falls into that informational category. And that's important to note because it's going to kind of guide us in terms of the things that we're assessing. The second thing we want to think about, and this came up in our chat, is starting to think about who is the audience that's coming to this page. Because we want to understand what their relationship is with us right now. Are they new? Have they never heard of us before? Maybe they know us, but they're coming back to our site for some updated information. Or are they a loyal advocate of ours and they're coming to donate or, share their voice by signing a petition or something like that? Thirdly, what are they looking to do? Are they looking for information? Do they have a specific pain point or a goal that we can help them with? Or are they really trying to complete a specific transaction, right? So it's important for us to write down, what is this target audience really looking to do? Lastly, are there environmental factors, right? Are they on a specific device, do we think? Is there a lot of noise where they are sometimes? Are they in a stressful situation? All of these things, I think, are important when we're thinking about how effective a particular piece of content might be. So again, in our case, with the Know Your Rights content, the abortion access in California, we're probably looking at new users. They are looking for trusted medical information, which I think is pretty important, and probably some legal advice too, to a certain degree. And it's very possible that they are in a stressful situation because they're looking for these health resources that are clearly a hot topic within current political environments. And it may be specifically for themselves or a loved one or somebody else that they really care about. And so it's very possible that they are in a stressful situation. So the last element of all of this is starting to look at page level goals. We know what type of content we're looking at. We know who we're talking to. Given that, what are some page level goals that we're looking to accomplish on our audit? So number one, for us in the Know Your Rights content, we really want to build brand trust, right? Because again, we're talking to somebody who is looking for legal and medical advice in some regards. We want to deliver rights information to a diverse group of audiences. So again, that goes back to our strategic goal. We really think that it's important to deliver this information to a lot of different people, right? This is a very important topic, and the ACLU in particular is really one of their strategic goals is to deliver civic rights information. And then lastly, we really feel it's important to provide a resource to users that they can take with them. So they don't have to necessarily come back to the website to find this information. They can download it, use it on their own, or share it with other people. So again, we're getting close to activity time. And if you look at the audit example, we have filled in all of these different steps. We have our URL identified, we have the type of content, we have a description with our relationship, what they're looking for, and environmental factors included in our target audience. And then we have our 4 page goals filled in. So we are coming up here on activity time. Now we're going to give you some time to actually practice this process on your own. And as somebody asked earlier, is there going to be a blank worksheet to work off of? There is. So the first link that says audit-report is going to be a Google Doc if you prefer to work off of Google Docs. This is what it will look like, and you get a blank one. If you prefer to work off of Microsoft Word, if you click on this link and then download it, you can use that off of Microsoft Word. So we're going to give you about 10 minutes to go offline, do a little bit of these steps on your own. Feel free to go through step number 1 and fill out your guiding question, and then go through and do steps number 2 and 3. And if you have time, try and think about one page level goal for your audit. If you don't get there, not a big deal. But if you would like to, go ahead and think about one specific page goal that you want to assess against. If you get stuck, go ahead and use that example report. And then lastly, when we come back, we'll do a 5-minute share out session, and then we'll jump right into the second portion of this workshop. We've got our audit organized. We're ready to actually do the analysis, or ready to do the audit. So let's talk about page analysis, or actually running this audit. So at a high level, when we're doing this process, we like to take it in 3 different steps. I'm going to give you kind of the overarching process, and then we'll drill down on some more details for each of these steps. Step 1, where I always like to start, is analytics. And so, if today you don't have access to the analytics, not a big deal, but we can walk you through a couple of things to think about in this process. Step 2 is we actually have sort of a cheat sheet that we're going to send over to you. I'll walk you through it in a second, but it will give you some best practices based on the type of content that you're looking at. So you can really just go through and check a bunch of boxes and say, hey, this does this well, it doesn't do this well. And you can use all of that, put it in your audit report, and then find some ways to improve those issues. And then lastly, again, remember we set those page level goals. We're actually going to go through the process of looking at each of those goals and deciding what works well, where there are opportunities, and what we might do as a result of that. So let's drill down on each of these steps in a little bit more detail, and I'll start to walk you through the analytics portion of that. So number 1, in our audit guide, and let me pull it up. I'll share this with you in a second, but you can see in here that you have on the left-hand side all of the different content types. And if you jump to that section, it will have a description of what the content is, the examples of types of content, what a successful web visitor visit looks like, some metrics that you might want to consider. And then we'll talk about this in a second, but it has a bunch of basically a checklist of things based on the type of content that you're looking at. And so you can use that guide as a way to understand what metrics should I actually be looking at. And again, shameless plug, in June, we are going to go through this process of deciding which metrics are most meaningful to your website in a lot more detail. And so if you'd like to participate in that, we'll send a link for that at the end of this. Secondly, oftentimes with analytics, we get overwhelmed. We try and look at every single thing. The great thing about Google Analytics, or any analytics platform, is it gives you lots of information. That can also be its Achilles heel, right? When you try and look at 20 analytics, sometimes you get overwhelmed. So I recommend just start with 1 or 2 at the outset and try and use analytics to compare or benchmark the page that you're looking at versus other pages like it. And then lastly, again, dashboards help a lot. So if you have a particular area where you report already on specific metrics, that allows you to narrow down onto just the metrics that are meaningful to your organization. And again, if you participate in that analytics workshop, we actually go through the process of figuring out which metrics to choose. And then we actually give you, and we're going to share this with you as well, a free data studio template that you can use to plug your analytics into. So what we found when we looked at analytics on our Access to Abortion page, we found that it was one of the top ranked entry points across the ACLU of Northern California website. It had only average engagement rate, so we kind of put that into the maybe this is an opportunity bucket. We might want to investigate what other Know Your Rights pages do well to increase the engagement rates. And then lastly, you'll remember one of our page level goals is to deliver information that people can take with them. So unfortunately, when we looked at the analytics, this particular page did not have any situations where people were downloading those resources that they could take with them. So I just kind of walked you through it, but the second step here is our content best practices checklist. And so again, if you keep scrolling down to the bottom here, you'll see that we have a content audit checklist. All you have to do is read the item. If it looks good to you, go ahead and check it. If not, leave it unchecked. And again, that can be put into your report as an opportunity for potentially improving the page. If you're kind of on the fence about it, I would just include it as an opportunity, and maybe you can talk through it as a group during the reporting process. The other thing to note in here is there are a number of links that are really helpful for tools like Google's automated testing for mobile friendliness. This Hemingway app does a really good job of giving you like readability scores. There are a lot of other tools out there that do that, but this is kind of a cool new one that I've seen. And so there are a number of links in here for tools that you can run automated processes on your site. So hopefully that's going to be really helpful. And again, we'll share this with you shortly when we get into the activity. So in our case, when we went through the checklist for informational content, we basically found that the content that we looked at on our Know Your Rights page was well structured. It had very clear headers. It had a pretty good mobile experience. We felt like it had a big opportunity around adding in video or images as a way to deliver information. Not everybody is going to necessarily be in a situation where they can read long blocks of text. And then also we noticed that there was not multilingual content available for this. And again, if one of our strategic goals is to deliver information to a diverse group of people, then having multilingual content available is a really important feature there. So the last step of all of this was, again, during our organization process, we outlined our page level goals that we wanted to hit on. And so we go through and do a page level goal analysis. So some tips on how to get started with this. Number one, just ask some really simple questions about what works and what doesn't about that specific goal, right? Now, this starts to be a little bit more of an art form than something that's really specific. But after you do this a few times, again, it's like an exercise. You're going to get better and better at it. So if you get frustrated or stuck at the outset, that's okay. Just keep moving forward. And, as I said, after you start to look at some examples or you start to look at other pages on your site like this, you're going to get better and better at it. Secondly, I'd highly recommend, if you are looking at your site, go out and find some other sites on the internet, whether they're organizational peers or maybe even commercial sites that do similar things to you, and start to get some inspiration from them. We'll walk you through an example about that in a second, but looking at other sites can be a really good way to sort of assess the effectiveness of your site. As I said before, use our audit guide as a good starting point. Below our checklist section, we have another section called content strategies to consider. So again, it's going to give you a little bit of a hint in terms of how to assess those page level goals. So you'll remember in our organization process, we had 4 different goals that we were looking at. The first one was to develop trust with our users. And so we felt like our page, just because the ACLU brand oftentimes carries a lot of weight, we immediately have the capability to create trust with a lot of our users. However, there were a lot of opportunities, I think, to increase that. And so one of the things that we did was we went out and we found on WebMD this really interesting thing at the top of their informational articles that says medically reviewed by a specific person. And if you click on that, it elevates who that person is, what their credentials are. And so in our case, we thought, hey, maybe we could add in that this was reviewed by a specific expert in this particular law area. And then again, connect that to a biography about what that person's expertise is. And again, that just goes towards that building trust. This information is something that you can really consider. The second goal that we had was delivering information to a diverse group of users. We really liked how this page was set up to have this jump menu on the left-hand side. So it was really easy for people to jump down to the section of the content. It's also a great way for people to see an overview of what's on the page. So that really worked out well. But as I brought up before, this page you can see is a lot of text, and some of that text is very jargony. We thought it would be really great to have some supporting media, whether it's videos or images, as a way to explain complex things to people. Not everybody is going to be in a situation where they can read a really long document. And so, especially with the way social media is now today, we're very familiar now with consuming information through video and audio. And so adding that into the page, I think, could be a big benefit for this page. Thirdly, one of our goals was to get new users to our site. And this particular page performs really well on a lot of different keyword searches related to abortion in California. But we also thought there was an opportunity maybe to incorporate Google Ad Grants. So for those of you that are familiar with this, this is a program that Google puts on. They give 501c3s $10,000 a month in free advertising on their search engine. So we thought, hey, maybe this is an opportunity to show up in even more search results. And then lastly, we wanted to assess, are there resources on this page where people can take them with you, right? And so the last thing was we noticed there were no downloads, and that was because this download button, there wasn't actually a resource. So that's a huge opportunity and one that we think is really important to consider. So that was the process of going through and auditing those 4 page level goals. Now we have all of this information. We've gone through 3 steps of auditing this page. What do we do with it? We need to make this actionable in some way. So ultimately, we actually really like to keep this process very simple. And we just focus in on 4 different questions. And you'll see at the bottom of your audit sheet that there's an area where you can fill this in. So number 1, what worked well? We like to start off with the positives, right? If you're reporting to people that maybe created this page or quote unquote own the content on this page, it's really important to start off with positivity, right? Because if you start off just talking about the things that you don't think are good, people are gonna shut down and stop listening right away. So start with, hey, this is the positive thing. This is what's working really well, and here are the reasons why we think that. The second question that we like to answer is, where are the opportunities to improve, right? And again, let's keep this focused on the content itself. Let's not make this a personal thing about somebody's writing style or whatever it is. Try and frame things in terms of opportunities. 3, what are the resources that are going to be needed to accomplish this? Can we do it in-house? Does the team that maybe needs to participate in this have capacity? Right? Especially at organizations, we're always dealing with different capacity issues. Do we need to hire outside resources to do this? If so, do we have somebody that we already work with? Do we have a budget for it? We need to really consider all of these things. And then lastly, how do we prioritize this work? Who should drive it? And what I would recommend, and you don't have to follow this advice, but I think this is actually one of the more important questions to answer, is how do we do that? We recommend that you try and start with the easiest things first. And one of the reasons for that is that helps get momentum and gets the team moving forward. Secondly, what we've seen oftentimes is that sometimes the simplest changes actually make the most impact on a page. And so it could be even something as small as, hey, let's break this text into sections to make it easier for people to skim, right? And so when you start with the simple things that don't take a lot of resources, and then you start to see improvements in the metrics for this page, oftentimes that gets people more excited to continue to do more things to it. And then you can start to take on some of the larger projects that maybe take more resources, more time. But if you start off with the biggest process first or the biggest project first, it could take months. People can lose steam. It could, chew up all of your budget. So just be really cognizant of how you try and prioritize things as you start to make all of this audit process actionable. So activity time. Let's take 10 minutes here to do the last 2 steps. And for those of you that would like to check out our audit guide, I just put the link in there. Feel free to make a copy of that and take it with you. We're going to take about 10 minutes here and do the last 2 steps. Number 4, which is actually the audit process, and then number 5, if you can get through putting together kind of the report.